Hi, I'm Jacqueline.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
Welcome to Courtney's cat is scratching at the door, and so we will have to edit out some random pauses while while the cat tries to get in and Kevin is not home to take care of the cat.
Yeah, hopefully that one pause could be edited out, but maybe you'll just hear a cute little meow because that's what happened right when I went to talk.
That was like the time my cat had a really adorable sneeze, so I'm like, "Yep, I'm just gonna leave that in because who doesn't love a cute little kitty
Yeah,
cat
very, very
sneeze?"
true. So yeah, if you hear a few noises, hopefully it'll stop soon. I don't hear it at the moment, so Kevin will be back soon. Kevin will be back soon.
We are very busy people with busy lives and a lot of creatures in our houses. And sometimes there's background noises. I'm sure you've heard my cats, my dogs, my child, my husband, probably most often my husband. But, other than that, we're here, we're doing it. We're giving you guys what you want. Hopefully, maybe, I don't know, just on a ramble. Had a very long day yesterday trying to get back in the normal. Anyway, so today's episode. Oh, wait, no, we have an update.
That sounded like a little unhinged there at the end. It's been a long day. What can you think on track? Like you started talking faster and faster. Like it was just like speed up.
I'll just go ahead and, talk about my day yesterday where we decided to go to DC, which is 100 miles from my house. And apparently we cannot get there in less than 5 hours. The last 2 times we've gone to DC, it has taken us 5 hours to get there. And it is absurd. And so we missed the baseball game that we were going to go see because it was so late by the time we got there. By the time we park and get in and pay for tickets. And I'm like, do I even want, I don't know. And then it ended up pouring down rain anyway. So it's like, we would have gotten rained out of the game if we had gone there. So we just went to a playground for my daughter and went to a bookstore and got some falafel, which was delicious. So that was a plus. But then it started pouring down rain. And so we waited and we waited and we waited and it's like 7 o'clock. And I'm like, okay, I don't think this is going to stop. And so we undressed my baby, put her clothes in the diaper bag and just ran to the car, had her wrapped in a little blanket. So that way we could put her back in her dry clothes. But we were soaked for the entire drive home. And then by the time we got out of the parking garage, the sun was shining and it was not raining. So if we waited 3 minutes, it would have stopped.
That's how it goes,
Yeah. And then the way home, of course, we couldn't, go pee anywhere in DC because there's nowhere to pee in a city ever because I guess people just don't pee there. I don't know. Tell me if you live in a city, what do you guys do when you're out for the day? Because there's nowhere to go to a bathroom. Anyway, so we stopped at 2 different gas stations in Northern Virginia. One of the bathrooms were closed because of COVID. What? Do you only catch COVID in the bathroom? You can come in the gas station without your mask, but you can't go in a bathroom.
They just didn't want to clean it.
And then the other one, I don't know why they were closed. They just had stuff in front of the bathroom. They had cases of water blocking the doors. I'm like, what the hell? So, had to stop a bunch of times. Then the interstate was closed down for 20 miles because a tractor trailer ran off a bridge and they have to repair the bridge. So the interstate's going to be shut down for a long time now. So it was quite the day. And I know that's way more information than you guys needed, but since I'm a little unhinged, just letting you know why. Anyway, Courtney, take it away with our update.
Yeah, so we only have one update. So this has to do with the podcast, the Murdoch Murders, which I've personally not listened to yet. Need to on the list. Maybe I'll get there someday. But I mean, it was topping charts for a really long time. But so that kind of deals with the death of Maggie Murdoch and her son Paul Murdoch as well. So I guess there's been some suspicious circumstances all along, kind of being did Alex, the husband / father, do it? Well, he was officially indicted on murder charges. So possibly, I guess we'll find out more. So yeah. Pretty big update because I know that's a pretty big podcast. So it's kind of one of those podcasts starts investigating and then good comes from it, which that's the goal of any podcast, I guess, is you want something good to happen.
Yeah, it's definitely nice when you're digging into something and it's okay, you're trying to make a difference. You're trying to put information out there and you're actually able to move forward with something. So that's always good. So our case today is one that I think most people know something about, but there's a lot more to it that most people, I feel don't know. So hopefully you guys will also learn something new today. So our sources were the book Kitty Genovese, The Murder, the Bystander, The Crime That Changed America by Kevin Cook, and the documentary called The Witness, which was actually something that her brother had helped create. Also an article from the British Psychological Society and the New York Times. So Kitty Genovese is known as the woman that was murdered in front of her apartment building in New York City while dozens of witnesses watched and no one helped. This murder was used to coin the term bystander effect, which states that people are less likely to help someone when there are a lot of other bystanders than if they were the only witness. Her murder is cited in sociology textbooks and was used to point towards urban apathy and the fact that people in New York City supposedly don't care about anyone else. They're just focused on themselves. This was a pretty big case with a lot of long-standing implications. But who was Kitty Genovese? And are the widespread details of her murder actually accurate? Probably not, or else that wouldn't be my opening line.
That, being like, yep, it is. Here we go, proving it.
We get to the end. Exactly what we said it was. So Catherine Susan Genovese was the first child of Vincent and Rachel Genovese, born on July 7th, 1935. So her parents ran Bay Ridge Coat and Apron Supply Company, which sold supplies to restaurants in New York City. The Genoveses were Catholic Italian Americans, and they shared a row house on St. John's Place in Brooklyn with 4 other Irish and Italian families. They would go on to have 4 younger children, Bill, Vincent, Frank, and Susan. So Kitty was described as talkative, witty, charming, a good student. She attended the all-girls Prospect Heights High School and was named class cut-up her senior year. She would often play hooky with her friends and go to the beach or smoke on the roof. I mean, just living her best life. She's having a good time. So Kitty graduated high school on June 25th, 1953, 2 weeks before she turned 18. One night shortly after, Kitty's mother witnessed a murder in front of her on the streets in Brooklyn. So Vincent and Rachel really feared for their children's safety at this point, and they decided to buy a ranch house in New Canaan, Connecticut, because they thought it would be safer there. So since she was now 18, Kitty really didn't want to move to the suburbs. She's like, I've lived in Brooklyn my whole life. Like, I just graduated. I'm ready to be on my own. So I want to stay in the city.
I'm sure New Canaan, Connecticut and Brooklyn in New York City are extremely different places.
Yes, very much so. So she had no plans to go to college, and she decided at first to live with her grandfather and work as a secretary at an insurance company until she was able to earn enough money to get her own apartment. At some point, she did marry a man named Rocco, but the marriage was quickly annulled, and like a lot of people that she knew was like at the time were like, yeah, I have no idea. I had no idea she was married at all. So it was a very short thing, not really a whole lot of information about where they met or how that came to be. But in 1954, she started working as a waitress and a hostess before becoming a bartender. And Kitty was a lesbian, although many people in her life didn't know this while she was alive because it was the 1960s. So it wasn't really a safe time for members of the LGBT community. You know, it was more hidden and you didn't really share that part of your life with a lot of people. In 1961, Kitty had been dating a girl who was into horse betting. So Kitty then got roped in and would accept bets in the bar where she worked. And one night, an undercover police officer came in and placed a $9 horse bet. So Kitty did write it down and was then promptly arrested and charged with operating an illegal gambling enterprise. So they're just like super serious about their horse betting, apparently. So the most famous photo of Kitty Genovese, like the one that I think most of us think of when we think of her, is actually her mugshot from that night, which is crazy because like she's so beautiful in it. Like it's just like this, you know, she was just so like looked so classy and like put together, and that was her mugshot. So she was convicted for this and fined $50, and she did get fired from the bar that she was working at. So not ideal, but not the end of the world. So after that, she started working at the bar Ev's 11th Hour, and she was actually promoted to bar manager and ended up moving to Queens. So the staff and patrons of the bar were a really close-knit community, and Kitty really enjoyed working there. She usually worked from 9 to 6, although she did often stay late because she was the manager and she would pick up double shifts, like just working all the time. As a manager, she did take care of the bookkeeping, making sure the staff and the vendors were paid. And at this time, she was making approximately $5,000 a month in 2014 dollars, which is when the book was written. So she's making pretty good money at this bar. And she had, like some of her friends would be, you know, encouraging her to get married. And she's like, I make enough money by myself. Like, I don't need a man to take care of me. I'm doing just fine. She was really well liked by the staff and the customers and was known for giving out personal loans as well, but she wasn't super strict about people paying her back. So she's just like, yeah, here's $10, $20 here and there. Yeah, you'll pay me back. And then most people didn't, but she was just very generous. She would also call cabs for the patrons that had had too much to drink and would sometimes even take them home herself after work. She did have dreams of opening an Italian restaurant, and she was saving up money to be able to do so. In March of 1963, Kitty met a woman named Marianne at a bar. So Kitty went up to Marianne and said, "Don't I know you?" And Marianne's like, "No." And Kitty just laughed and introduced herself. So that was just her pickup line. It's like, "Hey, don't I know you?" No,
it's like
okay.
Have you met Ted? Like,
exactly. So they had a really good time that night, but they didn't exchange information or anything. It's just a one-time thing, and they went on back home separately. But a few days later, Marianne came home to a note on the door of the boarding house where she lived that said, "I'll call you later at the payphone across the street." So it wasn't signed or anything. And Marianne's like, "I don't know how she found out where I live, but I just knew that Kitty was the one that wrote this note." So Kitty did call the payphone that night, and she told Marianne to meet her at 7 Steps. So 7 Steps was a below-ground bar for lesbians. So again, not very accepted in the 1960s. So it was kind of a hidden gem type of thing. So the women met at the bar, and then Marianne took Kitty home with her that night. So Kitty was 27 and Marianne was 24, and they soon moved in together and got a 1-bedroom apartment in the Mowbray Apartments located in Kew Gardens, which was the smallest town in Queens. So they lived on a really safe middle-class residential street. So there were like storefronts like on the street, and then the apartments in the upper floors of the buildings. There was a bar called Bailey's Pub on the street, and a lot of the residents didn't really like it because it could be noisy in the early hours of the morning. There were sometimes some like domestic arguments outside of the bar. But other than that, a lot of people that lived there viewed Kew Gardens as very peaceful and safe, especially for like being located in New York City. They're like, this is a pretty safe area for being in New York. So Marianne was working at Western Union in Manhattan, but she got tired of the long commute. So Kitty found her a job bartending near their apartment. So Marianne and Kitty had Mondays off work, so they would go to Greenwich Village, which was a really big LGBTQ scene. So the Stonewall riot wouldn't happen for more than 5 years. So a lot of the community was not out yet. They weren't generally accepted. It was actually illegal to serve alcohol to gay men and lesbians. So like bartenders and bars and stuff would receive a fine. And you would also be fined if you were caught dancing together. So
which is like weird to me because
60s.
Like today, like straight women go out in groups and dance with their friends. So do straight men. Like you just dancing with each other. And I'm sure like,
it was
no,
the
this
same
is just
then.
my best friend. Like we're dancing because we like this song and fuck men. Like what?
Yeah. Right? Like, whew. I mean, if it was the 1960s, Courtney and I would definitely be getting fined many times.
we'd be gone.
So they really enjoyed going to the markets and listening to live music, especially folk music. And again, this is the 60s, so they did watch the civil rights marches and MLK Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech on TV, just giving you kind of a feel of the setting and historical context and everything. They would visit Kitty's family in Connecticut on the weekends, but her family just thought that Kitty and Marianne were friends and roommates. They didn't really know that they were in a relationship. Kitty's younger siblings adored her, and they were always so excited when she came to visit. They just thought that she knew everything. And they remembered that she would always like take the time to answer their questions. Like she was just so patient with them. Like she's the older sister that, basically moved out while they were all still in school. So it's like they weren't super close to her, but then she would come visit and it was like this big, exciting thing. And she really took the time to get to know them. So Kitty and Marianne would sometimes fight about money, especially the fact that Kitty was so generous and was always loaning her money to friends. And Marianne's like, you got to stop giving away all your money, And one time after a fight, Kitty bought Marianne a poodle. So they named him Andrew, and that was their little family. Which is cute.
I love how she's like, they're fighting over money, quit doing money. And like, I bought you a poodle.
Right. I bought you a poodle to make it all better. And now it gets sad, as you knew it would. Unfortunately, because this isn't a fun podcast. So we don't just tell you fun stories about lesbians in the 60s that are living their best lives. So on March 12th, 1964, Kitty drove to work at Ev's in her red Fiat. It was just a normal winter day at a bar in New York City. It was pretty slow after midnight, so she did grab dinner with a regular customer and was back in the bar before 3 a.m. At this point, it's still pretty slow, so she told the bartender to go ahead and close up early, and she headed home. So parking was always tough in Kew Gardens because there weren't enough parking spots to accommodate the number of residents. So Kitty and a lot of other residents would park in the Long Island Railroad Station parking lot. So Kitty parked her car and was walking towards her apartment when she noticed someone walking behind her. So she started to walk quickly towards her apartment building, and at approximately 3:20 a.m., a man approached her and began stabbing her. Kitty yelled, "Help, he stabbed me." Robert Moser, who lived in one of the apartments, heard Kitty yelling and saw her kneeling outside the bookstore with a man bending over her. So he yelled at the man to get out of there and to leave her alone. So the man who was stabbing her got up and calmly walked away. Joseph Fink, who was the elevator operator of the building, also saw the attack and went back to work without intervening. So a lot of people who were like hearing this commotion initially thought it was just like a domestic dispute. Again, probably a couple arguing after leaving the bar. It's just after last call. They just hear some yelling going on. They're like, you're just having a fight because you hit on another woman or whatever.
Yeah.
A woman named Irene Frost heard shrieks from her room, so she got out of her bed where she saw a man and a woman by the bookstore. So she waited a minute, but then she didn't see or hear anything else, so she went back to bed. Again, you're thinking the situation's over. It's New York City. I'm sure you hear random sounds all the time.
Outside a bar, like you're probably hearing it all the time. Like how many times do we all leave the bar any time, but especially after the bar closes and you just see every couple on the street fighting?
Exactly. So Kitty got up and began staggering down the street and calling for help, and she did make it into the side entrance of her building into the stairwell. So the man who stabbed Kitty realized that no one was coming out to help her, so he walked away from a distance and then saw she's staggering away alone. No one's coming out to intervene. So he did circle around to the Long Island Railroad parking lot and back up the street where Kitty had gone. So he started opening random doorways until he came upon Kitty, who was bleeding in the stairwell. He then started stabbing her again. Do you want to put a trigger warning for sexual assault here if you want to hit the 30-second skip button? He then raped her and stabbed her into her vagina.
Oof.
No words. So Kitty's neighbor, Carl Ross, opened the doorway to the stairwell and saw the man stabbing her. He then shut the door and then opened it again to peek back out. Did I really just see what I think I just saw?
Especially if you're
so then he went
waking up or whatever. You're wait a minute. I can't be seeing what I'm seeing.
Hold on. So he then went home and called his girlfriend to ask what he should do. And she told him not to intervene. So he didn't.
Oof. Big yikes.
Yeah.
So another neighbor heard the screams and called another neighbor to ask what they should do. So they called Sophie Farrar, who was friends with Kitty. So Sophie immediately said they should call the police, and police finally received the call at 3:50 a.m., 30 minutes after Kitty's attack started. So Sophie ran down the stairs where Kitty lay dying, and she sat with her until police arrived 2 minutes later. And a man shouted out the window to police that she was around the back of the building, and the ambulance didn't actually arrive until 4:25 a.m. And Kitty Genovese did die en route to the hospital. So police did wake up Marianne to tell her what happened, and Carl Ross went to her apartment and had a drink with her, and he didn't mention that he'd witnessed the attack and had decided against calling for help. He's like, I'm just going to collectively leave that part out while I'm comforting you.
Yeah, let me just have a drink with you after your girlfriend was just brutally murdered while I watched it and did nothing.
Yeah.
Cool, Carl.
So Ross got into an argument with police and kicked a hole in the door and was arrested for disorderly conduct. So detectives thoroughly investigated Marianne for 6 hours. So they did suspect they were lesbians and harassed Marianne about the nature of their relationship. So they're like, oh, we just believe jealousy could have been a motive and that women were more jealous than men. And they saw a lot of crimes related to jealousy with lesbians.
Like what? What?
Yeah, just so much sexism and homophobia here.
Yeah,
especially being women are more jealous than men. They can be, but some men can be a little extra.
Right. I don't know the stats here, but I'm pretty sure that men are much more likely to stab their partners than women.
And as far as jealousy goes, I don't really think you could say one is significantly worse than the other, but
no.
Anyway.
And why are you assuming that her murder had anything to do with jealousy in the first place? There's nothing to indicate that. What are you even talking about?
Yeah. So Marianne initially ID'd the body at the morgue, and then Kitty's uncle gave the official ID because her parents were too distraught to do it. The witnesses who saw the man walking away gave police a description of both the man and his car. And on March 18th, 5 days after Kitty's murder, a man in Queens saw someone taking his neighbor's TV out of their house. So, knowing that the neighbor wasn't moving, he called police because he suspected the man was breaking into their house. And because he wasn't sure how long police would take, the neighbor also removed the distributor cap from the man's car when he went back into the house.
Yeah, he's like, I'm going to make sure this guy does not get away. Like, I'm doing my neighborly duty here.
Yeah. So when the man's car wouldn't start, he started calmly walking away. So the neighbor tackled him and held him until police could arrive. So when police arrived, they found a screwdriver in the man's pocket and 2 TVs and some appliances in his car. So looks like this neighbor was right because
Yeah.
He identified himself as Winston Mosley and admitted to stealing the TV. He said he was giving it to his father to sell in his repair shop. So Mosley also admitted to doing this many times in the middle of the night, and police noticed he matched the description of the man that killed Kitty and that his car matched the description of the one that was seen leaving Kitty's murder. So they took Mosley in for questioning, and they saw he had scabs on his fingers. So they asked, like, what's happening with these little scabbies on your fingers?
What is this here?
Yeah. And he said he just cut them in his house, just casually.
All the time, just accidentally cutting multiple fingers.
So the police said they believed he cut himself while murdering Kitty Genovese, because I think that is common, like for stabbings, like some of the knife can come back because it gets a little messy, when you lose your grip.
Yeah.
So Winston Mosley admitted to murdering Kitty and said it calmly, like he was just saying an everyday activity. Like, yeah, you're right. I did.
He's like, yep, I did get this from murdering Kitty. That's correct.
I just still, like, if you're the cop in that room, you're just like, I wasn't expecting this. Like, that's what you're always hoping for. But like when it happens so calmly and you're just like, oh shit. Okay. You're
just like, oh wait, let me back up my notes here a minute. Hold on. Start from the beginning.
So Mosley went on to say that he didn't feel any compassion and that he loved dogs, but people are not like that to him. People remind him of flies. I feel like we see this a lot with, like, not that this man's like a serial killer necessarily, but, well, maybe. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, sometimes by whose definition of a serial killer, how it gets like weird about that. But like, I don't know. I feel like they have like dogs and they like love the dogs, but then it's like people, they're like, fuck this shit. Like, what the hell? Like,
yeah, like that's the thing. Like, there's sometimes like compassionate towards like certain living beings, but not others. And it's very weird.
Yeah, very strange. So Winston Mosley was born on March 2nd, 1935, and he was 28 at the time he murdered Kitty. So he was an only child and his home life was very chaotic. His parents argued often and his dad was charged for many petty crimes. And his mom had many affairs and would leave Winston home alone, like when she went to go sleep with men. So she would just kind of leave him there to fend for himself. And when Winston was 9, his mom told him that she had a tumor in her stomach and she had to go to the hospital to have it removed. However, this wasn't true, and his mom just left him and his father and fled to her family in Michigan. So she was just like, I'm gone. Goodbye. Which I'm like, why are you going to tell your son you have a tumor and you have to get it removed? Like, you couldn't come up with anything else for like why you're leaving.
Yeah, such a weird, like,
I
don't know.
And eventually Winston found out that his father wasn't actually his biological father. So Winston became obsessed with learning about insects, specifically ants, and spent a lot of time with his ant farm. And eventually his dad couldn't care for him and sent him to live with his mom's grandparents on a farm near Detroit. And while there, he observed the animals and their mating behaviors and became unnaturally interested in them. Like, not a good interest.
Yeah.
At age 16, he was sexually assaulted by his aunt, and this did continue for 2 years. And at 19 years old, he met 17-year-old Pauline, and they quickly got married and moved to Brooklyn, where they lived above a bar. So Pauline started sleeping with the bartender, and Winston bought a gun and threatened to kill him. He then filed for divorce with Pauline's adultery as the basis for the divorce, and his dad opened a TV repair shop in Queens, and Winston followed him there. He lived in his dad's apartment and then started working at Ray Graham, which was a business machine company in Mount Vernon. So he punched data cards and a job that would eventually become obsolete with increased computer technology. So Winston met Betty, who was an RN in a record store, and they soon got married and had a son the next year. So they bought a 4-bedroom house in Ozone Park in Queens, which was about 10 minutes from Kew Gardens. So Winston reunited with his mom and even invited her to live with his family. And Winston and Betty then took in another child whose mother was a cousin of Winston's. So Winston had an IQ of 135 and deeply cared for his 5 German shepherds. And although like he started to become kind of isolated from his wife and sons, so he enjoyed painting, poetry, and music, but he soon started going to bars after work and then retreating to watch TV alone when he got home. He also started neglecting his hygiene practices, and Betty said he started like looking more run down and like not put together, and like sometimes you gotta
Just like
shower
a big,
people, like ooh.
Yeah, just like a distinct like change in behavior all of a sudden, you know.
He also started going for drives alone around 2 to 3 a.m. and he suddenly started bringing his dad TVs and radios to sell in his repair shop. And one time his dad got mad at his mom and started waving a gun around and threatening to kill her. And Winston took the gun from his dad and said he would take care of it himself, but he didn't hurt his mother. So during police questioning, Mosley also admitted to other rapes and the murder of another woman just 12 days before Kitty. And on February 28th, he followed Annie Mae Johnson until she parked outside of her house in South Ozone Park. He cornered her outside and pressed his gun to her belly, and she handed over her purse thinking she was getting mugged, and he shot her. He helped her up and then reloaded and shot her again 3 or 4 times. So Mosley rolled her into her house where he raped her, and then he covered her body with newspaper, put a scarf between her legs, and then found matches in her own house to light her on fire with, which is just like brutal.
Absolutely horrific murder.
So on March 12th, 1964, Winston fed his dogs and put his kids to bed after his wife Betty left for work. He made himself a sandwich and drank some beer and watched TV. And around 1:30 to 2 a.m., he got in his car and drove north. Now that he killed a Black woman, he wanted to kill a white woman to see if it was like different. Like, does this feel different? Like, oof. So he drove around for more than an hour and was about to go home when he saw Kitty getting into her car. So he followed her to the Long Island Railroad station where he brutally raped and murdered her. He told police that she was wearing a menstrual pad at the time. So police did know that they had the right guy because only the police knew that she was menstruating at the time of her murder. Like this was one of those details like they hadn't released to the public that only the killer would probably know.
Yeah.
He also stole her brown wallet and took $49 out of it before tossing it near his work. He described the location and police were able to recover Kitty's wallet. Mosley also said that after he murdered Kitty, he came upon a man sleeping in his car at a traffic light, and Mosley got out of his car and woke him up, and the man drove off. So police are like, why didn't you also murder this man? And he's like, I just don't want to. So it's like, what?
Like, what? Like, how do you brutally murder someone and then like you come across someone like sleeping in a traffic light and you're just like, oh, let me go nicely wake you up and be like, hey man, you might want to go on. Like, what?
And if you're wanting to know like the difference between killing a Black woman and a white woman, why don't you also want to know the difference how it feels killing a man? Like, so is it just women that's pissing you off here? Like,
yes.
Yeah.
100%.
So Mosley then went home and waited for his wife to call at 7 a.m. like she always did to wake him up for work. So Mosley told the police after he walked away from Kitty after the first attack, he realized that no one was coming to help her. So he went back to find her and opened random doors until he found her in the stairwell. He punctured her lung in the stairwell so she could no longer scream for help at that point. He saw Carl Ross open the door to the stairwell, but then he left. And Mosley was able to tell police where he tossed the knife he used to murder Kitty. So police were sure he was Kitty's murderer, but they had doubts about Annie Mae Johnson because the coroner report said that Annie Mae Johnson was killed with an ice pick. Mosley insisted that he shot her, and on March 28th, her body was exhumed from where she had recently been buried in South Carolina. She was re-examined, and the new coroner saw 6 .22 caliber bullet wounds that the New York medical examiner had thought were like ice pick marks. I'm like,
you're really bad at your job if that's
and like ice pick feels so random. Like, why would you be like, that's it, it's an ice pick? Like, what?
Also, just to let you know how dumb I am. So when I was was reading this book and taking these notes for like, I mean, days afterwards. Like there was something else that I read about an ice pick that like triggered me to realize that I was thinking about something different. But the whole time I was reading it, I was thinking icicle. And I'm like, I know.
Oh my gosh.
Like, I don't know if it's actually possible or if it's an urban legend that like you can like die by an icicle. But that's just what I was thinking this whole time. And I'm like, how bizarre that the medical examiner would be like, this was an icicle versus a bullet wound. And then it was like a few days later, I read ice pick and something else. And then it just like all clicked. And I was like, wow, I'm really dumb. Yeah. That's not what it is.
That's so funny to be thinking that. Six of those too. That's like 6 whole icicles. Like you have to get 6 different ones. Because you know that shit's not strong enough. It's February in New York. I mean, I'm sure you can. And I'm just like, what? Like, why is that what my brain went to?
I don't know.
Mosley also admitted to murdering Barbara Kralick, and 15-year-old Barbara had been raped and murdered in her parents' home in Springfield Gardens in July of 1963. However, 19-year-old high school dropout Alvin Mitchell was already in custody after admitting to Barbara's murder, so police didn't believe Mosley was responsible for that murder. So Barbara was still alive when she arrived at the hospital, and she was able to give a physical description of her attacker. Her attacker did resemble Alvin Mitchell, who often visited Barbara, and police then interrogated Mitchell for 50 hours, during which time he confessed. He did recant his confession the next day, but it was too late, which is just another example we see of police just probably depriving you of sleep and food and forcing you to say something even when you didn't do it.
Yeah. And then the next day you're like, no, I take this back. And they're like, nope, you said it once. No take backsies. That's not how this works. And it's like, that's why we have to have like specific procedures in place for interrogations. Yeah. So Kitty's family was obviously devastated and never really recovered from her murder. Her youngest brother went to stay with family members briefly, and he wasn't even allowed to attend her funeral because I guess they just didn't want him to like have to deal with that. And this part was super sad to me. So at one point, Marianne's dog Andrew just disappeared from her apartment. Like he just disappeared and she never saw him again.
Yeah.
But in the documentary, Kitty's youngest brother said that their father brought the dog home. So I guess he like broke into their apartment and stole her dog.
Oh my gosh.
But the dog being there upset her mom so much that the dog just disappeared the next day. But again, Marianne never saw her dog again. So I'm like, you just stole
her dog,
what you thought was your daughter's friend's dog. And then it upset your wife. So you're like, okay, instead of taking it back, you just got rid of it. Like what? Why would you do that? I just cannot fathom.
Cruel. Like I know he's also grieving and stuff, but that's so cruel.
Yeah, that is so terrible. So at first, Kitty's death was just a small section in the newspaper, but it did make headlines 2 weeks later when the New York Times published a story about the murder of Kitty Genovese and how 38 neighbors watched 3 separate attacks and did nothing to help, and no one called for police. So this, I think, is the Kitty Genovese story that we have all heard. Basically, that she was attacked in the middle of the street, 30 people watching out their window, no one called for help. As you heard earlier, that's not exactly what happened. So how did this come to be? So journalist Abe Rosenthal scheduled a lunch with the police commissioner because he wanted to discuss the dual confessions for Barbara Kralick's murder, because the police department now had 2 suspects in custody who had confessed to this murder. So this journalist found out about it and he's like, oh, this is a good scoop. Like, let me interview the police commissioner about it. So the police commissioner is like, oh, I don't really want people like now they're going to dig into like our interrogation tactics. And I don't want this journalist running away with this story. So instead, I'm going to tell you about the Kitty Genovese murder. And I'm going to tell you how 38 people watched and didn't help. So that's how this came to be. So the story claimed that New Yorkers just did not care about one another and you couldn't count on anyone to help you if you lived in a city. And so this number 38, so there were 38 total people interviewed during the investigation. So like, yes, I'm sure there were 38 people who lived nearby who could have possibly heard something that were interviewed about it. Not 38 people that watched it. And there were 2 separate attacks, not 3. Again, just a lot of misinformation that was put in this article to sensationalize it.
Yeah.
So as we previously mentioned, there were a few people that did hear or see the attack and decided not to intervene. but most just heard the yelling and didn't really realize what they were hearing. So when they were interviewed later, they were like, oh yeah, I did hear, screams around this time. But again, they heard a few screams and then they looked outside. They didn't see anything. They went back to bed. That's pretty normal. Like, that's not unheard of. I apologize if I repeat something that I just said. Gonna have to do a little editing here because Kevin just scared the bejesus out of Courtney, and then me also thinking Courtney is getting murdered because he just walked in the door when we were not expecting him. But he brought Courtney coffee, so that was very nice of him. Yeah, and I'm glad Courtney did not get murdered live on the podcast. Although that would be some pretty good content, I'm not Courtney. Yeah. If there's a way, you got to go. I feel like that's top tier, right? So I was somewhere around saying that a lot of people heard some commotion, but did not realize what they were hearing. Like, it's not unusual. Like, if you hear screams outside, if you look out, you don't really see anything. I don't think anyone's going to call the police and be like, I heard a few random sounds, So obviously 2 people, so Joseph Fink, the elevator operator, and her neighbor, Carl Ross, did actually see the full attack and did nothing. So that is terrible. Like, that is just horrific. I don't know how you could not. I mean, you just call the police. Like, I get if you don't want to get in the middle of it because you don't want to die yourself. Totally get that. But you could call for help and they did not. But 2 people witnessing the whole attack and not calling is not 38 people. Yeah. So this became huge headlines then. So a lot of people blamed increased violence on TV or the women's liberation movement.
It's always the women. It's always the women.
Always the women and the gays just fucking everything up, So reporters started swarming Kew Gardens and interviewing neighbors to see like who knew her and like who saw it. It just became such a big thing. So Marianne ended up moving out because she's like, I just can't handle people coming around all the time asking about my dead girlfriend, who I can't even really acknowledge was my girlfriend because it's the 60s.
That's
and
I
have to say she's my friend.
With like Kitty's dad stealing the dog and stuff like that is like, she is probably in such deep grief and she can't fully explain why she's in such deep grief. Because I mean, obviously, even if it was just her best friend, that is a huge loss, but like your partner and like the love of your life, like that's a huge, huge loss. And to not even be able to tell people like she was my person, like, that's rough. And it's like at the funeral and stuff like that, you're like not even being acknowledged for like who you were to her. So Winston Mosley was charged with the TV burglary and the murders of Kitty Genovese and Annie Mae Johnson. So his bail was denied and he was appointed a defense attorney in April and went to trial on June 8th, 1964. So his attorney said that he was like strange, but really intelligent. He had a family, he had a good job, like he seemed very normal, but then he would describe these rapes and murders without a hint of remorse. Like even to his attorney, he was just like, yeah, I did this and gave details and was just so like calm about it. So his attorney persuaded Mosley to pursue an insanity defense, but he was hesitant to do so. So one of the psychiatrists who interviewed him said that he had paranoid schizophrenia with a hatred towards women, which we knew the hatred towards women part. And conflicting evidence was presented by both sides at the trial about whether or not Mosley was actually mentally ill. So you had experts saying he was, experts saying he wasn't. So not really sure. I also think it's kind of odd, and maybe we don't know like everything, or maybe I'm forgetting something. He wasn't abusive towards his wives, was he? Not that they said, no. Yeah, so I just think that's so weird too, that like you had 2 wives, and obviously with his first wife, he like threatened the man she was sleeping with, which I think is understandable. Like, you're mad, but it's just like so weird too. There's like no reports of like being abusive with his wife, and then he hates women so much. Like, where's your distinction from like? So weird. Yeah, very odd. Very odd. So at the trial, 5 of the witnesses who were interviewed were called to the stand. So one of them was Joseph Fink, who testified that he worked nights in the building running the elevator and that he did witness the first attack from about 50 feet away. He said he thought about getting his baseball bat, but he went home and went to sleep instead. And he said that he did not want to get involved, which really became like the quote that stuck out for this case. Like it was repeated many, many times. Just a very big, again, the one thing that people pull and assume applied to 38 people in this case. So Andre Peak testified that she called the police precinct the night of the murder, but then she hung up because she was unable to speak. So I guess she was just scared or
I don't know. Sam Koshkin testified that he wanted to call police, but his wife wouldn't let him because she said they must have received 30 calls already. So that's another thing that we hear a lot with this that we'll get into later, but, assuming that someone else has already done something to help, so you decide not to. And Hattie Grun testified that she called police, but they said they had already received calls and they were on the way. So there were calls made that night.
Yeah.
Like we'll get into it more in a minute, but again, just not exactly the way that it's reported still today. So Mosley testified about the events leading up to Kitty's murder and about all 3 murders that he claimed to have committed. So that's including Barbara. So when the jury was deliberating, they did ask for the definition of varying degrees of homicide before finally returning a verdict of guilty of first-degree murder. So during the sentencing hearing, the prosecution was allowed to bring in 4 women that Mosley had previously raped to testify. So one woman testified that Mosley came into her bedroom with a flashlight and she knew that he was going to rape her. So she asked him to please do it in another room away from her baby. And he said to hell with her baby and raped her in front of her child. Yeah. And another woman testified that Mosley held a screwdriver to her throat and forced her to perform oral sex on him before raping her. So the judge would not allow any evidence of mental illness to be introduced during the penalty phase because he said if it was already decided that he was sane enough to be found guilty, that he is sane enough for whatever sentence the jury came up with. Which I can see both sides of. I can see how you could come to that conclusion, and I can also see how, well, you can be found guilty with mental illness, but sentenced to life in prison versus death. I feel like mental illness is a determining factor.
Also the 60s though, and they didn't really believe into mental illness,
Yes, true. So on June 15th, 1964, Winston Mosley was sentenced to death for the murder of Kitty Genovese after the jury deliberated for half an hour. Kitty's family actually did not attend the trial at all. So in 1967, Mosley appealed for a new trial and said there was a conflict of interest because his attorney had actually represented Kitty during her gambling charge, and the attorney had not revealed this until after Mosley had been sentenced, which I agree is a big conflict of interest.
Yes.
Like that, like you're defending this man who murdered your previous client.
Yeah.
But his appeal for a new trial was denied. So the appellate court did not believe that was a conflict of interest.
I guess maybe they were like, there's so much evidence here that it doesn't really matter who the lawyer was. But also, like, this is fucking New York City. There had to have been like hundreds of lawyers. You couldn't have just like been like, no, it's not me. Here's 50 others so you can go. Like,
yeah. And it's also one of those things that it's like, if you just told the judge beforehand and then it was out there, then you could move forward and it's on record. And
if there would be a conflict of interest. Yeah, exactly.
But later that year, the Court of Appeals did rule that psychiatric testimony should have been allowed during the penalty phase. So at this point, Mosley's death sentence was commuted to life in prison instead. So Alvin Mitchell. So let's go back to this guy who was interrogated for 50 hours after the murder of Barbara Kralick. So he went to trial for Barbara's murder the week after Mosley went on trial for Kitty and Annie Mae's murders. So his jury was deadlocked, so he did have to be retried. So Mosley, this shit blows my mind. So Mosley actually testified for the defense at Mitchell's trial and admitted to murdering Barbara. So both of them did have details that were wrong. So like neither had like a complete accurate, confession. There was no physical evidence for either. But at his second trial, Alvin Mitchell was found guilty of manslaughter for the murder of Barbara Kralick. Okay. So as a juror, wow, my words are not working today. So you are determining if there is reasonable doubt. Another man testifying during the trial saying that he killed this woman, how is that not reasonable doubt?
Another man probably coming in his prison attire who just got convicted of 2 other women's murders saying, hi, I did this. And you still don't believe it.
Yeah. So Alvin Mitchell did serve 12 years and 8 months in prison for the murder of Barbara Kralick and has always maintained his innocence. So in an interview after being released from prison, he said that he would have admitted to killing the president by the end of this 50-hour interrogation. And obviously, many believe that Mitchell was wrongfully convicted and that Winston Mosley did likely kill Barbara as well. Now, if you thought things weren't crazy enough, we got another story for you here.
Yeah.
This one just keeps going, guys. There is so much to this.
It's not over.
So in March of 1968, Winston Mosley, I don't know if this needs a trigger warning. Maybe. I wouldn't even know what to say for
I don't either.
So he shoved a tin can so far up his butt that they had to send him to the hospital to have surgery to remove it. A tin can.
How
up
long
his
is
asshole.
his arm? To get it so far up, you can't get it back out?
Well, I learned from a TikTok recently that apparently your butt acts as a vacuum. And that's why so many things get stuck in there. Like when you see like nurses talking about like people coming to the ER with like cucumbers and stuff
hamsters.
like that. Because when you put it up so far and your butt just
sucks it up
like a vacuum, just sucks it in and it sticks in there. Oh my God. Okay.
Everyone be very careful about what you stick up your butt.
Be really careful with butt stuff, guys. Just only use stuff that's intended to go in your butt. Okay. Not a tin can. So after his surgery, correctional officers arrived to transport him back to prison. And when they were distracted while he bent over to tie his shoes, he took off running. So Mosley escaped from the hospital and hopped a fence. He broke the cellar window of an abandoned house 900 yards from the hospital. And in the house, he found some canned food, a pocket knife, and a loaded revolver. So the house had been unoccupied for a few years. And he's like, look at all this cool stuff I found.
Yeah.
So a massive manhunt started in 16 states. And 3 days after escaping, Mosley called a New York State Employment Service and asked for a maid to be sent to the house. So Zella Moore arrived, and after she cleaned the house, Mosley threatened her with the gun he found and raped her over the course of 5 hours. He then threatened that he would find her and kill her if she called the police, and then he let her go. So Zella was afraid to call the police, but she did want to alert someone, so she contacted the homeowner, Janet Kralick, and said that something was off with the house. She said there was a gun in the home and that looked like someone had slept in the bed. So Janet had inherited the house when her parents passed away, and she knew that they had a gun. So like she wasn't too concerned at first, but then she's like, well, maybe I should look into this. So she contacted the police, and the police took the call at 7 a.m. on March 21st. So Janet asked for someone to meet her at the house to check it out. And she was told that shift change was happening soon, and the next shift wouldn't be there until 8:30, that she would have to call back then.
So Janet decided to have her husband Matthew go with her, and they'd check out the house together without the police. So when they arrived, they saw the broken window, and Matthew grabbed a crowbar. So Winston met them at the door and held a gun on them and made them sit down while he stole $31 from Janet's purse. Then he forced them upstairs and made Matt strip and Janet tie him up. Her hands were shaking too badly, so Mosley tied them both up. He gagged Janet and led her into the bedroom next to Matt, and he told them he was the escaped killer everyone was looking for, and so he tied Janet's hands and feet to the opposite bedposts and raped her. Then he asked Matt how far it was to New York City, and Matt said about 400 miles. So Mosley took Matt's car keys and left in his car. So Matt was able to escape from his bonds and untied Janet, and then they could call for help. So Mosley made a wrong turn on his way to New York City and ended up about 10 miles south of Niagara Falls. So Mary Kay Pappas answered the door with her 5-month-old daughter, and Mosley forced himself inside. Her friend Gladys Costanzo stopped by while Mosley was holding Mary Kay hostage. So Gladys said she'd just come from church and that people would be looking for her if she didn't return. So she was like, okay, you can kill me, but people are going to start coming. They're going to be coming for you.
They knew where I was coming and what time I left, and this is not a good idea.
So Mosley told Gladys to leave and bring him a car, and that if she called the police, he would kill Mary Kay and the baby. So Gladys went back to the church and called her husband, who called the FBI, and federal agents and state troopers secretly surrounded Mary Kay's house. So Gladys arrived and left the car outside with the keys on top, but Mosley correctly sensed that it was a setup. So the FBI called the house when Mosley stayed inside and told him he was surrounded and he needed to come out. He said he would only let one person in, and so Special Agent Welch came inside. Mosley said he would rather die than be captured, and while he was speaking with the special agent, Mary Kay and her baby were able to sneak out the back window with help from the FBI. So thankfully, they were okay. Mosley finally surrendered and was taken back to prison. The Kralikas sued the state for $1.5 million, claiming contributory negligence for their role in Mosley's escape and their subsequent kidnapping and rape, but they lost the lawsuit, which I'm like, but maybe you should have given them some money because you had one job to keep this guy in custody and then
like he was tying his shoes and then just took off. Like, come on. Like,
yeah, it's just oof. So
yeah.
Decades after Kitty's murder, the New York Times finally admitted that some of the details in their feature were not true. Rosenthal admitted that it would have ruined the story if it was reported that the witnesses didn't realize a murder was occurring and they only heard screams, because it's a very different thing to watch someone be murdered in 3 separate attacks and not call the police than it is to hear a few screams, see nothing out your window, and go back to bed. 2 very, very different scenarios.
Yes.
Kitty's family rarely talked about her after her death. Her father did die of a stroke at 69 years old, and Kitty's siblings tried to protect their mother from news of Kitty's death, but after she died, they did find newspaper clippings about Kitty's murder and Mosley's trial. Kitty's younger brother, Bill, joined the Marine Corps and took a lot of risks because he didn't want to be a bystander like those who witnessed his sister's murder. And on the 3rd anniversary of Kitty's death, both of Bill's legs were blown off after stepping on a landmine.
And so crazy that it was the anniversary, the same day. Wow.
In 1977, Winston Mosley completed a degree in sociology from prison, and he wrote an editorial for the New York Times stating that he was reformed. Sure. So in 1979, Mosley changed the story and said that Kitty cut him off in his car, and then she started yelling racial slurs at him. So he followed her and stabbed her with a knife that he just happened to have on him. So now, all these years later, he's completely changing the story.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we all know the likelihood that that's what actually happened.
Yeah.
It's not.
So at his parole hearing in 1984, Mosley said that his crime was important because it brought awareness to the bystander effect. He also referenced raping the 2 women during his escape as proof that he was a changed man because he could have killed them and he didn't. So let me out. I'm not going to kill them. I'm just going to rape them.
Exactly. See, clearly I'm reformed because I only raped them instead of murdering them too. You fucking piece of shit.
And also, if you were truly reformed, you would have some remorse and you wouldn't try to escape because you're I deserve to be here.
Exactly.
But he also said that his 20 years of suffering in prison is worse than what crime victims go through because their ordeal is short and then it's over.
You murdered them.
No remorse.
Their life is over, and you're I had it worse because I've been in prison for 20 years shoving shit up my butt.
Yeah. And
your fault, sir.
Yeah. And the thing is too, is it's when you murder someone, you are not just ending that person's life, the ripple effects it has in that person's life. How many people, her mother and her father and her siblings, her younger brother who decided to go to the Marine Corps and just take risks because of what happened. And how would his life have been different if Kitty hadn't been murdered? And how would all these things be different? Because you just ruined so much shit. And don't be acting your life is so much harder when it's no. So Mosley was denied parole every 2 years until his death on March 28, 2016 at 81 years old. Rotten hell, good sir.
Goodbye.
So Kitty Genovese's death that has been the long-standing symbol of bystander apathy. So this phenomenon states that the more people that witness a crime, the lower the chance they will intervene to help because they think someone else will help. So in 1968, the Unresponsive Bystander Report was published by Ohio State and Princeton. So researchers conducted experiments to see who would respond and found that with more people, the likelihood of someone intervening went down. So this became known as the diffusion of responsibility, in which one assumes that someone else will help so they don't have to do anything. So if you remember the one statement from the woman whose husband didn't want her to call the police because he's assuming 30 other people have called already. He's but if perhaps they were, I don't know, on a street where no one's there, more likely to, because you're well, I'm the only one here witnessing it. So
Exactly. Because if you're like, oh, there are 30 other people that heard it, surely someone else did something. But then the 30 other people think the same thing. And
I mean, even the person who like said like they did call and police was like, yeah, people have called. So then you're like, well, I mean, that, and then maybe in the future that confirms, this, that you're like, oh, well, that last time I called, they told me people already called. So I guess I don't really need to call next time,
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, obviously Kitty's murder didn't happen the exact way that it was reported, but the whole bystander effect clearly has been proven to be a thing in studies since then.
So this case is still referenced in sociology textbooks today, and at least as of 11 years ago, when Caffeinated Crimes took their first sociology class, it was still referenced with all the inaccuracies of the New York Times article. So there were definitely classes I took, I know classes the chaplain took, where a lot of this information like was not actually revealed how it was. Like it's just like a short snippet in the book about it being like, this woman was murdered and 38 people witnessed it and no one did anything. That's the bystander effect. And it's like, not great.
Yeah, like the first time, oh gosh, I know it's probably like 5 years ago or so when I heard like the actual details of this murder. I was like, wow, that's nothing like all of those sociology classes said.
Yeah, I feel like I remember you telling me about it too. Like I feel like I remember,
maybe.
I don't remember exactly, but I remember too being like, wow, yeah, that's crazy from
Yeah,
how different like college level courses are teaching. Yeah. So 911 did start in January of 1968, partially because of Kitty's murder. So at the time of her death, the police still operated on a feeder system. So someone would have to call their local police department, give the information, including their address. You'd be transferred several times until you finally reached the correct person. And it was up to the individual who answered the call, like whether or not to respond. So not all calls were recorded like they are today. So someone could have called, and maybe if you just don't sound exactly like, if you're like, I think something's happening or whatever, and they're like, oh, that doesn't really sound real. Like you might not record it. You might not respond. Like it's not like today where every single one, we have like the 911 records and like you transfer, you bring people, all that.
Like there's no confirmation. Like that's why it's not clear, how many people did call police, because it's like they may have called and there's just no record of it. And
or
so
you get transferred to the wrong person and then it hangs up and you're like, it's fucking 3 a.m. I'm going back to bed. I tried.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like harsh.
It's too complicated to get help.
Yeah. Like it sounds harsh, but especially if you're just hearing screams and you're not like seeing her like be stabbed and you try to call and like you get hung up on or you get transferred to the wrong person, you're just like, okay, you know what? I'm going back to bed. Like,
yeah.
Since Kitty's death, other neighbors have come forward saying they did call police, but they're not sure if anyone was sent out at the time they called because the call that was reported didn't come in until 3:50. So it's like, we don't really know when people came out. So it's possible that other people did in fact call police, but they was a disconnect at the time, like didn't reach the right precinct. The other person like answered the phone, thought it was a domestic argument, didn't think it was worth it. Kind of like what we were saying, like, human error where you're like, oh, you're outside a bar. Oh, there's a bar outside and you hear screaming. Okay. Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah. And like, yeah.
Police were also not trusted in New York City in the 60s, which do we trust them now? Probably not. So, I mean, also this is kind of a side note, but like, I have also like my previous neighbors would fight frequently. There was one time another neighbor called the cops, but I was always very hesitant to call the cops because he was a Black man. And I was like, I do want to protect like his girlfriend, but also like, what if I call and it's like the police fucked this shit up and all that. So, I mean, even today, it's kind of hard to trust the police. So,
absolutely. You're like, am I going to make this situation worse? Like,
so as we previously mentioned, members of the LGBTQ plus community could be arrested for dancing together, and many residents of Kew Gardens were Jewish people who had either lived in concentration camps or knew people who did, and they were hesitant to trust authorities. Like we just have like so much distrust and trauma and generational trauma too, I'm sure, like, you just don't trust them. And you're like, well, if I come forward, then they're going to start talking to me. And then what if I get, who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah.
So this could have just contributed to their hesitancy to get involved. So Kitty's death also led to Good Samaritan laws, which offer legal protection to individuals who provide aid to others in good faith. So, for example, if you witness a car accident, the car's on fire, so you pull the person out and injure them in the process, they can't sue you because you were acting like in good faith, like you were just trying to help them. So Mary Ann moved to Connecticut and got a bachelor's degree in psychology from Southern Connecticut University. She also started a master's degree but didn't finish it. She obviously struggled with Kitty's death throughout the rest of her life. And as far as we know, Mary Ann is still alive in her 80s today. And that is the murders of Kitty Genovese, Annie Mae Johnson, also Barbara Kralick, very likely from Winston Mosley, as well as the rapes of Zella Moore, Janet Calagla, and at least 4 other women.
Yeah. Like I said, that was a long one. There was a lot of information. Hopefully you guys learned some new things that you didn't know about this case. A lot came from this case, even though some of it was because of stuff that was incorrectly reported. It still is important information to be aware of with the bystander effect. So knowing that even if you witness something in a crowd, that doesn't mean that more people are more likely to intervene. The Good Samaritan laws, 911, just like a lot of stuff. And I do want to mention too, how Annie Mae Johnson's death is never really covered. Like I feel like a lot of people know Kitty Genovese's death, and she was the white woman that Winston Mosley murdered, and Annie Mae Johnson was the black woman that he murdered, and she's just not covered. Obviously, part of that is because of the situation revolving Kitty's and the media attention that it received. But again, bizarre that this is most likely a serial killer, again, depending on your definition and whether or not he killed Barbara Kralick. But he most definitely killed Annie Mae Johnson, and her name is not known like Kitty Genovese's is. So we definitely want to remember all of his victims. Like Courtney said before, all of the lives that are forever changed when someone is murdered, not just that of the murder victim.
Yeah.
So Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week is, at the time of this recording, in about 10 minutes, my brother-in-laws are on a plane back to Baltimore, and I'm very sad about it. That's not my perk of the week that they're leaving. My perk of the week is that they were here for the week.
I was like, damn, Courtney.
I worded that very poorly.
Damn, Courtney's perk of the week is that they are out here.
No. They were here for a whole week, and it was just so nice to have them in town, and like Kevin get time with his brothers, which like just doesn't come often because like we're all adults and we all have partners now, and it's kind of hard, like when we go back up there, I'm always there, and like, stuff like that. So
yeah,
my part of the week is that they were just here for a whole week, and I'm super sad because they are leaving, probably about to get on the plane and take off. And it's just really sad. I mean, I know they're probably happy to get back home, and I will see Sean in like 4 days. I got 4 days to recover before another Ebert vacation where rest in peace, my liver. But sorry I
Courtney
worded
to
that
hydrate
so
this week
poorly. I was just trying to make it like time relevant, which now this episode is going to come out in like 2 weeks, so it doesn't even matter. So you know what? Your girl's struggling. I need these 4 days to recover.
Yes.
Hence my coffee that Kevin brought me. Anyway. So that is my perk of the week, that we got to spend a week with them and like show them around some Knoxville places. And it's just always a good time, always a drunk time. But that is my perk of the week. Jacqueline, what is your perk of the week?
It's been a week. There's just a lot of shit going on. A lot of not great shit going on. And today I was cleaning my house and I'm like thinking like, what is my perk of the week going to be? Which is bad because it's like, obviously I have like so much to be thankful for in my life, but sometimes it's like, what this week? So you know what? I just want to talk about how much I love my front porch. just so you know, it's been a week. I've always wanted like I love being outdoors, and like having an outdoor space at my home has always been important to me. And so I have this nice big front porch where I have like rocking chairs, and when it's nice outside, after I put Millie down for the night, I'll go outside and sit and read until it gets dark and I can't see my book anymore, and usually have like a drink and just kind of relax. And but I just really appreciate my front porch. That is my perk of the week.
Sometimes it's the little things in life,
It really is. And sometimes when you're having a bad week, it's the little things that keep you going. So that's
exactly.
That's where I'm at. Do you want to tell us about your front porches, how much you hate your brother-in-laws, and you're so glad?
No, I don't. No, don't spread that lie. I was just trying to be like, oh, they're on the plane now, and I'm so sad. And then I was like, oh shit, I'm starting a perk of the week with them leaving.
We all know what you meant. But if you want to tell us all of those things, let us know if you knew all of the details of this murder, or if you only knew the New York Times reporting of it. On Instagram at Caffeinated Crimes Pod. We are on Twitter at Caff Crimes Pod. That's CAFF Crimes Pod. We are on Facebook at Caffeinated Crimes Podcast, where you can email us at caffeinatedcrimespod@gmail.com. We're also on YouTube and TikTok. It's some of those things.
And also, if you want some bonus content, if you want some video episodes, if you want a Discord, Google Hangouts, we are still doing Google Hangouts to the end of summer for all tiers of Patreons. You get a shout out, you get a pin and sticker at some tiers, you get quarterly gifts at some tiers, like a lot of, really good perks. You can do so at patreon.com/caffeinated crimes. And if you would feel so inclined to give us a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, that would be greatly appreciated. But you know what? In the meantime, go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.